Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon, how are you doing?
Afternoon, James. Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much, although it is hammering it down here at this precise moment in time.
Winter is coming. What are you talking about today?
Well, we are doing a follow-on episode. Last week we had Rob Wilson, who talked to us about systems thinking and explained what systems thinking is, which was all lovely. He pointed out all the problems that we've got, but we've got him back for a follow-on episode to explain what exactly we should be doing about it then.
So hopefully people listened to last week and the stuff that Rob was talking about definitely resonated with us. So I'm sure it would have resonated with our audience. So now, Rob, you are going to tell us how to solve the service issues of the country and effectively the economy of the country.
But
in 20 minutes.
20 minutes, yeah.
Just like that.
But before we do that, Rob, would you like to just introduce yourself again for people who didn't listen to the last episode?
Yeah, hi. So good afternoon, everybody. Rob Wilson, co-founder and director of Service Economics, CX Consulting Professional Services business, but a former customer service director and group systems thinking director for Aviva.
Thanks, Rob. We're lucky to have you. And I feel bad now standing in the way of you and the answer to the country's economic issues. But James, what have you been up to?
I have been hunting and gathering.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have been picking apples off an apple tree, much to my wife's amusement. I went out and spent 20 quid on one of those fancy apple pickers, and I probably got about 8 quid's worth of apples out of it.
You bought an apple picker. Can't you just go and climb up a ladder?
I'm not my age, mate, no.
I mean, Rob, you must. Everyone loves a gadget, right? You want a new gadget.
This is not a gadget. This is a professional apple picking piece of apparatus.
I was going to say, because there's no way at any point when I'm thinking, what gadget do I next want to buy? Do I think, you know what, I'll buy an apple picking thing?
That's because you haven't got any apple trees.
It's a long way down the list, isn't it? It's a long way down the list of things that you need in your life.
It's not going to trouble the top three, is it? Let's be right.
Yeah, go on. Now you're standing for where you finished laying into me. What have you been up to?
Well, no, what have I been up to? Well, I have been experiencing how the other half live. One of my daughters went to a private hospital this week, so I could see how the other half lived, which was great. Bear in mind, my daughter's only 21. We walked into this private hospital, and it is pretty luxurious. And coming out as we're walking in is a guy who's accompanied by 3 prison guards in really massive. I mean, we're not talking handcuffs. We are talking full Monty chains.
Did you have the Hannibal Lecter mask on?
It wasn't far off that. Anyhow, he's obviously had some sort of treatment. He took it off, and my eldest turned around to me and said, "So, you know, the insurance is paying for us. Who's paying for him to get treated?" I said, "We are the taxpayer in my sleep." So, that was my experience of private hospitals. Can we just recap, Rob? So, just in 30 seconds, what is systems thinking?
Yeah, so systems thinking is an approach to change in organisations that first of all requires you to take a systemic look at the organisation, so understanding how the whole organisation works together. Its different component parts to deliver a shared aim. And then the thinking part, and I'm really oversimplifying this, but the thinking part is about understanding some of the beliefs and assumptions that we have as leaders and just challenging those critically using sort of data and evidence to understand whether they're actually based in reality.
Great. Thanks, Rob. We will get out of your way and tell us, how does systems thinking solve the problems of the world?
Well, I don't think it solves the problems of the world, but I do think that there are some useful techniques and things that you can do, which will definitely help to improve service in your organisation. So look, I think on a practical level, the first thing that you have to do when you want to improve service is go to where the work is being done. And typically in most organisations, that's going to be in a kind of contact centre, call centre environment. Now, very often, so I used to run a contact centre. We'd get royal visits. The CEO would come along and say, "Oh, I want to spend some time." Some of the people he dedicated 12.3 minutes listening to calls. And what would happen was he'd listen to a call. There'd be a problem for a customer that came through, and we then spent the next 6 months trying to fix that problem for that customer because that was the most important thing that we'd heard. Don't do that. So that's called seagull management.
Oh, don't, Rob. I spent ages. There was a guy who came and did that once to me in a sales operations. And yes, it still haunts me. And I tried to explain to him that in terms of the issues we had, that again wasn't troubling the judge. He wouldn't have it, just had to get it fixed.
So, royal visits notwithstanding, the most important thing is to go and understand what's going on in your organisation.
Yeah, and look, James, that can be, you can be the HR director, you can be the IT director, but you should really understand what's going on at the coalface in the organisation. I can remember an operations director that came into the contact centre I was running and had one of those kind of profound observations. He says, you assume that things work, but they don't, do they? And what he meant was, sitting in the ivory tower of senior management, there's just this belief that everything is working as it's been designed. And it's only when you come down to the shop floor and you see the challenges customers have, the workarounds that front end teams are having to put up with, etc., that they realize that stuff isn't working as it should be. So getting into the contact center, getting where the work is done, and seeing what happens is really key. Not with that view to I'm going to go and solve the first problem that I come across, but to understand what's the failures and the frustrations. So the first question that you should be asking if you see a problem is, well, does this happen a lot? Is this something that goes on regularly? Because we want to be fixing the problems which are systemic, the ones that happen regularly, rather than things that happen infrequently.
Some organisations are really good at this. I used to work for Asda, a major supermarket chain. And I was a head office while I'd sit in Asda House in central Leeds, and it was all lovely and beautiful. What they used to insist, at least once a year for a week at Christmas, but preferably more often than that, every head office colleague had to go and spend times in the store. And I tell you, Asda in Hyson Green is a million miles away from Asda House in Leeds, but it really does open your eyes and give you a really sound understanding of what's going on and things you just would not believe.
Was that your job title? Asda Waller,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever seen that program Undercover Boss? It's a great example of that, where the CEO dons his wig and his false nose and glasses and goes undercover and just learn stuff about the organisation that there's no idea is what's going on. They very often jump to the wrong conclusions about what the issues are that need to be solved, but they at least can see what the problems are.
Right, but then there's two bits to that then. So the first bit is go and look, but it's not just enough to go and look and understand. There really is a question of, well, what are the really big problems, and focus on the big things rather than trying to fix all this small stuff.
Yeah. And so there's a way of going in to actually study the work. And so the first bit is to understand, well, what are the demands that I can hear coming in from customers? Why are customers contacting us? And you'll start to get a pattern after a while. You'll start to see the demands that are the most common. But the key thing is to understand which of those are value demands from a customer's point of view. As the customer, I want to buy a policy, I want to make a claim, I want to change my address. Versus which of those are failure demands. So what's happening with my claim? Or I haven't received my documents, or I don't understand this thing that you've sent me. And starting to get a feel for which of those is giving you the majority of the work that's coming in. And of course, you can then start to kind of categorize that and quantify as to how much failure demand is a really good starting point. The second thing you can then start to do is look at, well, how effective are we at handling that demand? So when a customer contacts us, am I able to actually deal with that where it comes in? Or do I have to pass it on to another team, another colleague to complete, which means the customer's now got kind of waiting? Or do I even pass it back to the customer? Actually, Mr. Customer, you need to do something else. So for example, a customer would call to do their change of address. I was working in another country where the response was, we'll send you a form to fill in, or you need to go onto our website to do that. So the customers are being sort of, had the job given back to them. And when you start to then look at the matrix of what's coming into your organization, value, failure, first point resolution, pass on, pass back, it's quite possible you see in some organizations that what's coming in, again, is a really high percentage of failure demand that's then being passed on somewhere else in the organization or being passed back. Now, there's two things that tells you. First of all, that's a pretty unsatisfactory place for an employee to be working, because they can't actually help the customers that are coming in, and the customers are calling them a failure. And the second thing is, from a customer point of view, that's not giving you a great experience. So it really quickly starts to give you a very different lens around what's going on.
And Rob, we talked, you mentioned this is a good way of senior people looking at when they go and visit an organisation and go and look and learn. But I suppose the reality is anyone can apply this to their teams. If you're a team leader, you want to understand the type of work your team's doing and improve the work. You can apply this sort of thinking to that as well, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. This stuff is not rocket science. It's not complicated, and it's something that really every leader in an organisation should be doing on a regular basis. I think that the next thing that when I'm going into a contact centre to talk to people is you get chatting with the people on the phone and you ask, what does your manager pay attention to? That tells you a lot, because if the answer comes back, it's a whole set of numbers, and what those numbers are, that will give you a fairly good idea as to what the organisation's focus is. And it's very rarely on doing the right thing for the customer, delivering what matters to the customer. You'll very often hear back, well, it's about how many calls I've taken per day. I've got to take 50 calls a day and hit a compliance score of 95%. And if that's the case, again, it gives you an indication back to what we were talking about in the previous episode about what are some of the things going on here in terms of the thinking that's driving this, that we probably think we're driving efficiency, but actually are we driving an effective outcome for the customer?
I suppose the real question is, but then so what? What comes next after that?
Yeah, so I guess once you've studied the work, you've understood the demand that's coming in, then really you need to start to understand what's driving the failure demand. And this potentially requires you to then start to go beyond the contact center to other parts of the organization. So you might find that you've got backlogs in another team, or you've got issues in terms of the way the product's been designed that are upstream from the contact center that are what's driving the failure in. And it's one of the reasons I think we talked at the start of the first episode about systems thinking, some of the challenges with it, that by its very nature, you do start to kind of creep out into the organisation to people who are, hang on, who are you? Why are you knocking on my door? I've got important things to be getting on with. Your problems in your contact centre are not my priority because I've got my own things to be getting on with.
The show you're listening to right now brings you insights to help you improve performance and enjoyment of work.
It takes a long time to produce, but we think it's well worth it. It's all in the name of helping you getting the job done well.
All we ask in return is that you share the link to this show with someone that you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't already, click on follow the show wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
But that's really interesting then, isn't it? Because what you're saying is the most important place in many ways to be is the shop floor and understanding what's going on there. But in a lot of the organisations I've worked for, success looks like getting off the shop floor.
Yeah, you're right. In most organisations, the contact centre dealing with customers is the lowest paid, lowest rung job in the organisation, and people are trying to get away from dealing with customers. Whereas in reality, if you're a customer, you want to be talking to people that have got the most experience, the most skill, that can actually help you solve your problems. This goes back to this front office, back office thing where organisations tend to want to put their most experienced people away from the customer. You get this kind of front office, back office thing. So customers end up never talking to the people that really know the answer. They're the ones that will get back to you in 3 days. What we've learned is it can be much more effective to put those people closer to the customer, resolve the issue there and then, and reduce the overall workload on the organisation.
And that's an interesting one, because I've seen that done in particular in claims organisations. And when dealing with complex claims, people would think that first bit that you have where you have to just triage the claim and gather some info, that's the easiest bit. So put anyone on that, then the clever decision making at the back end, that get your best people on that. So you end up doing that way around. But what you end up with is huge amounts of work up the front end because people don't quite understand it, don't quite know what to ask for, can't make the right decisions. And so you create a load of work that then it eventually gets to the expert. The expert has to rework it anyhow. So to your point, put the expert at the front of your process and watch what happens. Everyone thinks it's the wrong way to do it because it's a little bit counterintuitive. Actually, it's hugely effective.
Yeah, massively so.
So we talked through the system. So at this point now, you've got people understanding the system more. But what about the thinking bit there?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges here is helping some of your senior leaders to really understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening. So we can see for ourselves, okay, I've got these issues, and kind of why is that happening? And that's the bit where typically people need help. They need people like me and you to come in to help them with that thinking. So I'll give you an example, which was, again, back from my time working in Singapore, where I had a CEO was in the contact center, our request listening to some calls, and the call came through, and the young lady took this call from a customer who was really pissed off, had phoned loads of times before, and the young girl really took time. She got this customer sorted, dealt with the issue. The customer was really happy, went away. And this call had taken about 15 minutes, but she'd done a fantastic job, sorted it. And she put the phone down, and she immediately turned to the CEO and said, "I'm really sorry." And he said, "What do you mean? I just listened to the call. You did a fantastic job." And she said, "Oh, well, yeah, but that call took 15 minutes. And I know I'm only supposed to take 5 minutes on a call." Now, he couldn't understand what this conversation was about. And so therefore had to be helped to understand, well, okay, the call center team have got a target to deal with these calls in 5 minutes. The reason they've got that call target of 5 minutes, we can kind of trace that back to your conversations at the exec level around productivity, efficiency, need to save cost, etc. That's how it's manifested itself. And very rarely do the senior leaders directly say, "I want to have a 5-minute AHT target in the contact center." And it's about how do you help join the dots between decisions that are made at a senior level for the right reasons, but then seeing how they operationally manifest themselves because the wrong thinking has been put in place. And that's the I guess the secret to it.
Somebody once said, when you're at senior levels, you're worried about money, and when you're at junior levels, you're worried about tasks. But it's that middle bit where you're trying to marry the task to the money and get people to explain, which is actually, that's that translation bit. That's the most difficult bit in many ways.
Yeah, you're right. And it's good. It's back to those unintended consequences of decisions. So another example was in the sales and service contact center, where strategically, right, we need to sell these additional products to customers. That's what drives our kind of revenue and profit. So 80% of sales that we make of car insurance need to have legal expenses products, attached to them. So you imagine what happens, that I'm a call handler on the last day of the month, 10 minutes before the end of my shift, I'm sitting at 80%, I'm going to get my bonus, and a customer comes through and says, "Yeah, I want to buy the policy, but I don't want that legal cover." Now, if I sell the customer that policy, I'm not going to hit my bonus this month. So what happens? Hang on, my computer's not working. Sorry, Mr. Customer, can you call back tomorrow? So we're actually turning sales away. Now, again, that's.
It's funny you should say that, because I've seen exactly that thing happen in the call centre near me.
Well, I had that example was selling loans, and we wanted to see people sell loans. The most profitable loans were the loans with insurance attached to them, but it was done, as you say, on a percentage basis. So if they got somebody come through for just a loan, and they realised there was no way they were going to sell them insurance, they would do that. Are you sure? Are you sure this is the right loan for you? Do you want to go away and have a think about it, and then give us a call back after you've had all very nice about it? And I remember going back and listening to it and thinking, why on earth are you doing that? And the reality is they were doing that because they didn't want to mess up their loan percentages. So they would rather not have a loan than have a loan that didn't have insurance attached to it, because it messed up their bonus.
Yeah. And it's really hard to explain that.
It is. When you're talking about thinking and changing thinking, is it, because I guess there could be two parts here. One, there's senior leadership thinking about systems thinking as a way of doing things, or is it just senior leaders thinking about cause and effect between what they see going on in the front line and how that manifests itself, or is it both?
It's probably both, but I'd say the second of those is a really key one if you're a senior leader. I do think there's a lot of kind of linear thinking goes on, and a search for simple solutions, golden bullets, whereas actually real sustainable solutions tend to be a little more complex. And again, what we tend to find is that people want quick results. So we've got a problem. What we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is spring into action. Whereas actually the first thing we should really be doing is seeking to understand the problem. You know, have we really understood the problem, and have some of the solutions we might believe are the right solutions, have we tested them? Can we go away and test them? So this kind of studying the work, studying what's going on. And that then leads us into another kind of systems thinking thing, which is single loop versus double loop thinking. So let me just explain that for a second. So single loop thinking tends to be the default. We kind of think we understand the problem, so we can go straight to the solution. And it tends to be very efficiency focused. How do we do things kind of better, quicker, cheaper, faster? So we're going to keep applying the same logic, but just kind of ramp up turn the dial up on that even more. Whereas with double loop thinking, you're kind of stepping back a little bit and questioning, do I really understand the problem? Might there be a different way of thinking about what might work in this? Have I got all the evidence that I need? And the reason that's important is that if you don't change the thinking, then you're never really going to change the sort of paradigm, the core paradigm in which you're operating at that system level, which in turn is driving the performance of the organization. But getting people into a double loop thinking space, again, can be really tough.
Have you got a good example of double loop thinking at work?
Yeah, so a simple example might be we get lots of calls from customers wanting to know what's happening with their claim. So a good single loop response to that might be, well, customers can now go online and they can find out what's happening with their claim. The double loop is questioning why the claims are taking so long in the first place, that the customers are having to chase up because they don't know what's going on. So the double loop thinking would be more focused on the effectiveness of how quickly we're settling the claims, rather than, we know the claims take forever to settle, so let's find a way of letting the customers know what's getting that update. When you start to look, you see those kind of examples of single loop thinking everywhere, to be honest.
But isn't that just, as simple as single loop thinking is? You just do your job. You're not really thinking about it. You're just doing, you execute on what you've been asked to do. Whereas double loop thinking is, you might execute on it, but you think, is there a better way of doing it? Should we be doing something different here in the first place?
Yeah, I think the single loop thinking tends to still be associated with we want to improve. We want to improve sales, so let's run a sales incentive. Now, the default assumption is that sales incentives are effective, therefore running a sales incentive will improve sales. But if you challenge the assumption that actually are sales incentives effective, have we tested that? Can we look at the data to see how effective they are? Then you may realise that actually they're not, that they don't work in the way that you did, or they're good ways of helping people to hit the sales targets without necessarily improving sales, like the example that we gave a few seconds ago.
A couple of weeks ago, you said the first rule is don't talk about systems thinking.
Yeah.
The penny drops for me really is people look at systems thinking and they think, oh, well, this is a way of improving my processes. If I do systems thinking, I will get efficiency, I will get effectiveness, it will work better. But that's not the game at all, really, is it?
No, and again, it's one of those kind of mental shortcuts that people are looking for. Which box do I put systems thinking in? Oh, it's in the process improvement box. Oh, it's an ops thing, and therefore by default, everybody else in the organisation has opted out of it. And that's why I would, if someone said to me, Rob, we want to kind of do systems thinking, my first question would be, are you sure? We were very fortunate when I did this at Aviva that we had the absolute support and commitment from the CEO, who was pretty ruthless in kind of telling the country CEOs and senior leadership, you will be doing this. Whereas if you've not got that absolute buy-in from the top, again, and I've seen this, is that you hit a point in the organisation where it's really hard to then affect that change. Because this is about cultural change. It's about the organisation thinking and working differently. It's about breaking down organisational silos. It's about thinking differently about the way that we use measures and metrics. Yes, it's about changing our processes, but that's only a kind of a part of it. And I say changing processes is really easy. Changing people's thinking is really hard. And when I've run training sessions for senior leaders, not just operational people, but across the organisation, everybody nods along when you tell the horror stories about bad customer service in the call centre. But the minute you turn to the HR people and start talking about some of the kind of crazy things really that we do from an HR perspective, the defences go up. Well, no, you've gone too far there, Rob. Now you're talking about our stuff. You don't really understand it, because people get very defensive about what they do, because it's kind of their job. And there's a saying we used to use is that one man's waste is another man's career. And what we might look at and go, that job is adding no value to the organisation. Well, that's still someone's job, So walking into an organisation and going, well, you're a waste, isn't going to win you many friends. So the kind of like the skill, the way that as an organisation you approach this has to be really carefully thought through. And I have seen examples where, in individual countries, you've got a few people that get the bug. It's one of those things that once you get it, you can't unget it. You can't unsee stuff. You can't unlearn stuff that you've learned. But you create people that are then kind of isolated in a sea of traditional thinkers that get a level of frustration, and that's kind of almost not fair on them. So I think any systems thinking initiative has to really come from the top down, to have that support for the people, therefore, at an operational level, who are going to be the ones doing the work and challenging some of those ways of, we've done things around here for the last 50, 100 years.
Yeah, but effectively then, success looks like not a process improvement coming out of the end of this. Success looks like changing the way people think, and it is actually changing the way the senior people think, because if they don't change, nobody else will.
You're right, and I also think one of the challenges. This is just a systems thinking thing. It's culture change generally. You could spend 2 or 3 years as an organisation on a big culture change program, and then the CEO leaves, and a new CEO comes in, and pretty much that's going to drive a different culture. So you realise that everything is kind of built on sand really when it comes to organisational change, because you're only really as stable as the tenure of your CEO in terms of driving that organisational culture.
And people often gravitate towards what they're more comfortable with and what they know well. And certainly my experience recently was taking out some of the performance management processes in an organisation, and which, as we all know, kind of the annual appraisal, racking the stack, get rid of the bottom. That some of the processes around that are really corrosive. And then when a number of people left the organisation at senior level, they're now putting them back in, because it's like, well, that doesn't work. We're comfortable with this, and it is just what what you think makes you successful.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm quite proud of is some changes that I made in the contact centre that I was running 12, 13 years ago have stayed, and actually delivering sustainable change. And the changes that I made were going from what was a very traditional setup in the contact centre, having a sales team, a service team, renewals team, all different people. And I multi-skilled them, put them all together. We focused on delivering what went for the customer. So they were able to handle kind of 80% of demands that came in. We got rid of all the targets, replaced them with sort of sensible measures over to all that. And it would have been very easy for that to have disappeared over time, but it was so effective, it survived. And I think that's one of the real, anybody that's done systems thinking does become a bit evangelical about it, because you really do see the power it has in terms of the better jobs for people, better outcomes for customers, and better results for the organisation. But because it's a thinking thing, it is going to be prone to the next person coming in saying, "What's all this nonsense? Let's do it my way, the old way." And you see that time and time again.
And therein lies one of the challenges I think that I have with this as not as a concept, because I 100% buy the concept and the stuff that we talked through. I think the key to a lot of this sort of thing, whether it's culture change or systems thinking as part of that, or whatever you're trying to do, where you need to influence people's thinking and behaviour, the key is in the execution of this. And whilst it was a long time ago, my experience of systems thinking was exactly what you said, in terms of some people picked it up, got very evangelical about it, and then just treated everyone else like they were idiots if they didn't get it. It's all, well, come on, you need to give me a bit more than just, well, it's obvious. And so I think that's one of the strengths of this sort of thing, is that people become very passionate about it, but that sometimes that passion can blind them to how they influence and how they take people along with them. And actually, to your point about long-term sustainable change, you've got to figure out how you take people along with you. And I rarely have found that telling them they're all idiots because they don't understand what you've seen the light probably isn't the way of doing it.
I don't know. I've been trying to read for 20 years now.
It ain't got you anywhere. So it's like...
Right. So how are we going to summarise that?
I guess it'd be great to hear from you. If you want to start to get some of the value of what you talked about for people to improve their performance, what would you recommend they start to do?
I think there are some simple things that you can do. Invite people in. Just bring in the people from HR, bring in people from IT, from finance and risk. Encourage them to spend some time listening to what customers are saying. Do a debrief with them afterwards in terms of what they've heard. Get a conversation going about why some of those things might be the case. Help other people in the organisation to think about what role they play in delivering good outcomes for customers, and get them to start thinking about, are there things that they do that maybe get in the way of that. I think that starts to get a company-wide conversation going, and if you like, the wider system working together.
So if that's the one thing we should do, what's the one thing we should stop then, Rob?
I think the one thing we should stop doing is trying to fix the people. Too much change initiatives are really aimed at fixing people. What we should be doing is trying to fix broken systems.
And in fairness to James, despite the fact that he hasn't been able to influence me on many things over the years, when we started these discussions, I would always believe that the people can outdo the system. That more we've explored it and the more we've understood our history and understood some of the things that we did that worked really well, actually getting the system right is absolutely critical to solving any of your problems.
There you go. Managed to change his thinking. Only took me 20 bloody years.
If anyone wants to explore systems thinking further and understand more about how it can work for them and the value that it can bring them, they can obviously get in touch with you and make sure that your contact details are in the notes for this show. So get in touch with Rob at Service Economics. Thank you very much, Rob.
It's been a pleasure. Cheers, guys. Take care.
We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
From purpose to corporate jargon.
but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
If your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiralling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com.
or James@jobdonewell.com.